All right, hello YouTube friends and family and subscribers and followers that watch the channel. If you're new to the channel and you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and also mash the bell for more notifications when I post videos. Okay, so most people know what I look like, so I'm not gonna talk about me, but I'm going to talk about a few things that you can. This is on the, even though I'm looking at this Allen and Heath console, this can be applied in your digital audio workstation as well as any other mixer. So what we're going to talk about is pre and post fader, because you're going to see this a lot, pre and post. Like for example, here's pre and post for auxiliaries and so forth. Most of the time you'll see that for the auxiliary sends, pre and post, and all that really means is pre-fader, which is your fader, and post. So let's talk about post. So when you have it in this particular console, most consoles the post is up. It's going to be, so if you bring the volume down on that channel, if you're sending it out to an auxiliary send, it's going to bring the volume down to the auxiliary send too. So if you bring how much volume you're giving that channel is how much volume is going to come out of the send as well, even though you might have a separate auxiliary send volume knob. So what's going to happen is if I even give this auxiliary send volume, even if I bring the fader down, it's still going to bring the volume down here. Now, why would you want to do that? You might want to do that for a couple of things. Let's say you're mixing, and let's say you have this auxiliary send. Most people use the auxiliary sends for two things: to send it to external effects, sometimes compressors, and other times they will send it to separate monitors or speaker systems for, like, maybe stage or in a live room or something like that. So they'll have a separate auxiliary. So you'll have a post and pre. So what happens if you bring the volume down, if you have it in post, if you bring the fader down, it's going to bring all the volumes down that's on that channel, whatever. So if this channel happen to have vocals on it and you bring the fader down, it's going to bring the volume of that vocal down in everything. Now, if you put it to pre, whatever signal's coming through this, let's say for example you were sending these vocals to a reverb. You had auxiliary send 1 here. You'll see certain DAWs or say send, some will say auxiliaries, but most DAWs say send. But you can also auxiliary, it's the same thing. You might want to send this vocal to an auxiliary 1, might be a send to like a reverb. So if you put it on pre by pushing this button down, pre, what'll happen is, even if I bring the fader down, the signal coming into this channel will still feed out. So it'll come to the master send, and then it'll still go to reverb, and then you'll be able to hear the reverb if you got the return from the reverb, wherever, if it's returning into the board on a stereo return or channel, you will be able to hear it. Sometimes you want that because you can bring the dry volume, the dry signal of that channel up, blend it with, like for example my reverb here, you will hear it blending. The two will be blending together. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you just don't want that. So it depends on if you want to hear that. In certain cases, I'll leave, for example, auxiliaries 9 and 10 on my console is set up for my headphones. So that way I can turn I can put this on pre, and I have a headphone volume up. So if I bring the fader down, the vocals will still feed out through that, and that way people in listening on headphones can still hear volume in their headphone sets for the vocals, if the vocals on that particular channel, if that makes sense. Okay. So pre and post, it depends on if you want other parts of the board to be heard, no matter what's going on with the fader. Post means that you want other parts of the board, if it's routed out to other parts of the board, to only be heard based on the volume of the fader. So that's the key to pre and post. So we'll leave that. So that should be a good understanding of when to use pre and when to use post. Now, you're going to have auxiliary sends. The only time you really want to use sends on your channel, no matter what the channel is if you want to affect that particular channel only. Whether you're inserting, and this is inserts, if you want to insert a compressor or chain a set of compressors together. For example, you can have the insert, which would be routed out of the console into a patch bay. You can cable in, and you can run a single compressor or dual compressors or whatever you want to insert on that channel. That's when you would use inserts. Usually in the digital audio workstations, what they'll do is that most people will put all their compressors, when they go to that particular channel in their mixer, in their DAW, they'll just right click and, or whatever the case may be, drag a compressor or a reverb or whatever onto that channel, and then they'll just, but it will only affect that channel. It won't affect any of the other channels. Most of the time, in most cases, inserting reverbs and delays are not, you really don't want to put your reverbs or delays or anything like that on that channel. What you usually want to do is set up an auxiliary send channel, or in this case, it already has, sorry, because this is real consoles are fixed. You would send, these would be your auxiliary send, so you would have 8 or even up to 10. This is actually 9 and 10 are shared, but you actually have 10 sends on each channel. In your DAW, it'll just be one, and you could just stack them. You can just stack. But a lot of times you want to right click and insert an auxiliary send channel and put your reverbs and delays on that channel. That way you can control the volume levels of that auxiliary send by itself. But that's the whole purpose of inserts on a channel, is to insert a compressor to affect that channel, or a particular piece of gear to affect that channel. You usually send your auxiliaries to mixes to maybe a headphone mix, or maybe a set of second studio monitors for the live room, or you might want to send it out to reverb processors. Now, buses. You want to use your buses. For example, for this one has routing where I can send it to the left and right monitor mix or bus channels. A lot of times you want to use the buses, so when you want to group a bunch of channels together to sum them into one set of channels, whether you want to do one channel or a pair of channels. That way, for example, let's say these ADA faders have all my drums on it. Well, all my drums, I can sit there and I would route this to, not, you notice I'm not doing left and right or monitor like that, nothing like that, because the buses are going to route to the left and right. So I want to send all these to the buses. So I'm going to send all these to the bus 1 and 2. So I push down bus 1 and 2. Now all these channels here are going to route into the bus. And then I can sit there and insert or even stack or chain a bunch of compressors and EQs or whatever on the bus. Now on this particular console, of course, all the inserts are on the back of the console, but most of the time, to do it right, you would have all your inserts coming out of the console into the patch bay. And then that way I can chain all whatever pieces of gear through the patch bay, so it'll come out of the inserts. Then I can chain with using patch cables into the inserts, and that would then chain whatever piece of gear I want to use. That's the reason why patch bay is that it gives you multiple choices of gear to patch in. That's why you want to use patch bays in this particular configuration. So that's the purpose of buses. Buses are the sum of all your channels together, and that's really what you want to do. Even in your DAW, you want to bus all your channels, maybe all your drums into a particular bus. This would be like maybe drum bus. This would probably be instruments, like maybe bass and keyboards and guitars. This would probably be maybe lead vocals, and maybe this would be backgrounds. So all your instruments would go into one bus, all your vocals, backgrounds, and so forth. And these will all sum into the main bus, the main master. And that would, or you could sit there on this particular console, because I have a matrix out, I use this to go back into my recording source. So, for example, 1, 2, and 3, 4. So I would turn all the volumes up for all these buses. These are all the bus volumes to come out from the buses. These will route into my matrix to go back into my audio interface. And that's how I would be able to hear everything coming from the buses. It will route into the audio matrix, and I can monitor that by pushing these two. I can listen to monitor here. I can monitor what's coming in through the matrix by hitting these two buttons here. And now I can hear what's going into the recording source. So that's the basic breakdown of auxiliary sends, pre and post, auxiliary sends, inserts, and buses. So to sum it up, once again, to wrap it up, you want to use pre or post based on if you want whatever's coming on those channels to be affected by the volume level. If you don't want, for example, if you want to route stuff out of your channels, but you don't want the fader to mess with it, then you put everything on pre. Put all your switches to pre. You can actually do that in your DAW as well. You would set everything to pre. So if you bring the volume level down, the signals coming out of those channels would still route to wherever you got it routing through the console or in your DAW mixer. If you do want the volume level based on the volume level here, for example, let's say I want to mute the channel. I mute the channels, or I can use the master mute, what we call like a VCA control or whatever. What I can do is I can, whatever effect, like let's say for example, I want to bring the volume levels of the speakers down, but I don't want to affect the headphone mix. That's why I have the headphone mixes. Usually I have all the headphones, I got them up, but usually I have all the headphone mixes, which my headphone mixes happen to be 9 and 10 here. So now I can turn all my volumes up based on what's on those channels. I can get a good night mix and that will now route to the main, and whatever's on those channels will go to my headphones, and you'll still be able to hear it through the headphones because it's on pre. Even if I bring the main volume down, the volume in that channels will still be able to hear it through the headphones because they're on pre. If I leave it up to put it on post, which means after fader, pre means before the fader, post is after fader. If I put it on post, if I bring the volumes down, it's going to affect the headphone mix as well. The headphones won't be mixing too. So let's say you get a good nice balance of your faders levels. You want to put stuff on pre, so if your balance is faders and you want to bring other volumes down, other parts, you put it on pre. So you can adjust your own individual volume without messing up the fader mix, and vice versa. So auxiliary sends or auxiliaries, same thing, auxiliary sends. Or if you want to send this, you want to take whatever on these channels, whatever the channel is, you want to send it out to a reverb or a headphone mix or something like that. You use an auxiliary send. In your DAW, you usually have to set up your own individual auxiliary send channels. And then you can take the channels and send to, for most people set up auxiliary send channels for like reverbs. That way the reverb is not affected by the channel itself. That's why they usually have it going out through a send. So that's the inserts or the auxiliary sends. Inserts versus auxiliary sends is if you want to insert something on that channel to affect that channel only, then you do an insert. If you don't want your compressor to affect, but let's say you want to put compressors on your bus instead of your, and you want to sum all your, let's say for example these are all your drums, and you route all your drums into a bus channel, and then you want to put a compressor on the overall bus or group. All your drums now, because they're routed to the group, the whatever's on the group, then you can insert a compressor on the group, and that's where you could have what they call known as bus compression. That means you're putting a compressor on the bus channels. That's where the term bus compressor comes from. So you can also insert compressors on each channel. You might want a particular compressor to affect a kick drum or a snare. You can insert it on a particular channel, but also you want to sum all your drums together and have a compressor over the overall drums all together, which are summed into one bus channel. You can insert a bus compressor on the bus channel, and whatever's happened to the bus, and then the bus will then route out. Like for me, I have here boot groups 1 and 2, so I have 1 and 2 are being now routed out to left and right, which are now coming to the main left and rights because I have these pushed down. In your DAW, normally you'll see somewhere where your in and out settings, where your inputs and your outputs, usually at the bottom of the mixer, or sometimes at the top of the mixer. It just depends on the DAW you're using. Sometimes you have to right click and actually direct it to go to where you need it to go. For example, you might have to right click all your channels in your DAW and go down where it says, okay, send to bus, send to master, send to whatever. Like for example, these channels on your DAW might tell you, okay, let me look where my in and outs, my IOs, my outputs of that channel, each channel, the output section might have to be routed. So you might have to manually tell it to go to a bus, just like you might have to manually tell it to go to an auxiliary, or manually tell it to go to a, and so forth, or a send or whatever. So, but anyhow, the whole point is that, like, even on a lot of consoles, you still have to do almost the same thing. You have to direct it. Instead of, right click, using a mouse and, having a drop down box, you just hit buttons. That's the difference. But you hit the button, and for example, I got these channels are being routed to buses 1 and 2. So this is buses 2 now. Even though these are shared 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, how do I get these to be individually controlled? Let's say I want to stereo bus it. Well, let's say I want this. If you want it to be on bus 1, you just take the pan and send it to the left. If you want it to be on bus 2, you send it to the right. Same affecting your. But in DAWs, usually it allows you to say bus 1 or bus 2, no matter how many buses you set up. You can do that in the DAW. You can just right click and say, let's say bus 1, bus 2, bus 3. So these might go to bus 1, bus 2, but usually these kind of analog consoles, these right here are particularly fixed to be in stereo pairs, and then you got to control it individually by the pan. So that's going to wrap it up for pre-post inserts, auxiliary sends, and buses. That's pretty much should be it for let me recap. Yeah, so pre and post, Like I said, inserts affect the channel only. That's when you insert to only affect that channel. Auxiliary sends to send it out to maybe a headphone mix, set up a reverb channel, and then of course your bus is to group all your channels into one bus group. That is so that way you can control. And this is most of the time once you get all your levels set in your mixer, whether it's on your DAW or an actual mixing console, and you have everything routed to your bus. This is where you're doing a lot of your fader movements. A lot of times here, you can do it individually here, in case you're, if that's the case. The same thing in your DAW. You can, you want to do automation. You want to move faders according to how you're mixing volume levels and stuff like this. But your overall group buses is where everything's been summed out. So just remember, if you affect the volume here, you're going to affect the volume in your group as well. So keep that in mind. So other than that, that's really much the basis of pre and post sends, auxiliary sends, inserts, and groups or buses. Other than that, that's going to do it. Y'all have a good one.